Why the Stoics reject mental slavery. Stoicism, a philosophy that originated in ancient Greece, has inspired many people over the centuries. At its core, it emphasizes a clear distinction between what is within our control and what is not. But beyond the practical aspects of its teachings, the Stoics invite us to explore a profound and timeless idea: mental slavery. In a world where physical freedom was a luxury reserved for the few, the Stoics placed importance on something even more significant: inner freedom. For them, true slavery was not found in external chains, but in a mind trapped by passions, desires, and fears. Mental slavery, a silent enemy. Why were the Stoics so concerned about this form of slavery? Because they believed that the human mind has the power to either free or enslave us. By allowing our thoughts to be dragged away by irrational emotions, we become slaves to our own minds. We cling to temporary pleasures, fear the inevitable, and become frustrated by what we cannot control. Thus, without even realizing it, we build our own prisons. To understand why the Stoics reject mental slavery, it is crucial to grasp their perspective on human nature. They argued that as long as we fail to cultivate reason and virtue, we are always at risk of falling victim to our own irrationality. Uncontrolled emotions, material desires, and fear of physical pain were seen as the primary chains that kept people prisoners of themselves. Internal control versus external control. One of Stoicism's fundamental maxims is that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it. This is where the notion of Stoic freedom comes to life. While external events may be beyond our grasp, our emotional and intellectual response is within our control. Freedom, therefore, does not lie in avoiding difficulties or in getting everything we desire, but in our ability to remain calm and rational in the face of any circumstance. Imagine a ship sailing through a storm. The captain has no control over the sea's fury or the wind that lashes him, but he can control the helm. Similarly, the Stoics see the mind as that helm which, when properly directed, can lead us to a safe harbor even in the most violent storms of life. The trap of uncontrolled passions. Epictetus, one of the great exponents of Stoicism, was himself a physical slave, but throughout his life, he taught that true slavery was not what his body suffered, but what plagued those who could not control their passions. According to the Stoics, emotions such as anger, fear, envy, and desire, when not properly managed, make us slaves to ourselves. These feelings, when they dominate us, distance us from inner freedom. Instead of living in peace, in harmony with nature and with ourselves, we find ourselves in a constant internal struggle, seeking to satisfy insatiable desires and fearing what the future may bring. For the Stoics, this is the greatest of human tragedies, that, having the ability to be free, we choose to chain ourselves to what we cannot control. The true battle according to the Stoics. The Stoics believed that the true battle takes place within ourselves. To understand why they so vehemently rejected mental slavery, we must delve into their conception of humans as rational beings and therefore naturally free. When emotions and passions dominate us, we are abandoning that rationality, handing over our decision-making capacity to external forces. It is key to remember that, for the Stoics, the rational mind is what sets us apart from other living beings. Paradoxically, it is also what puts us at greater risk. If we do not cultivate it, we may end up being more enslaved than any animal because we become victims of our own emotions. Thus, Stoicism invites us to train our minds, to educate them so that they do not fall into the traps of anger, greed, fear, or excessive pleasure. The role of reason as liberator. The Stoics did not propose the total repression of emotions, but rather the conscious management of them. Reason had to be the guide that would allow us to navigate the sea of emotions without being overwhelmed by them. According to their philosophy, it is through the proper use of reason that we can achieve true freedom. To be a slave to the mind is to live in a constant state of unrest, where every external circumstance has the power to disturb us. The philosopher Seneca, in one of his famous letters, expressed this idea clearly. There is no favorable wind for the one who does not know where he is going. If we do not use reason to direct ourselves, we are at the mercy of the winds of life, being carried from one side to another without a clear destination. For the Stoics, the goal is to achieve inner peace, an unshakable serenity that does not depend on external circumstances. The pursuit of ataraxia, absolute mental freedom. The Stoics not only rejected mental slavery but also actively promoted the pursuit of a state of imperturbable tranquility, known as ataraxia. This state is achieved when the mind is no longer dragged down by uncontrolled passions. It is total inner freedom, where nothing external has the power to disturb us, and where the mind remains serene even in the midst of chaos. To reach ataraxia, the Stoics emphasized the importance of self-discipline and self-control. This does not mean that we must live an ascetic life or endure extreme deprivation, but rather that we must learn to moderate our desires and accept with calmness what we cannot change. The key to escaping mental slavery is, therefore, a profound inner work of self-observation and self-mastery. Stoic spiritual exercises. The Stoics developed a series of practices designed to strengthen the mind and spirit in the face of adversity. Among them is the premeditatio malorum, or premeditation of evils. This exercise consists of anticipating the difficulties we might face, not to obsess over them, but to prepare ourselves and remind ourselves that, although suffering is inevitable, our response can always be controlled. For example, a Stoic might begin their day by imagining possible setbacks, losing a job, facing illness, or suffering a betrayal. Far from generating anxiety, this exercise helps the mind accept that life is full of the unexpected and that, by accepting this reality, we reduce the emotional impact these events can have on us. The mind strengthens by not resisting the inevitable, and thus gradually frees itself from the chains of fear. Another key exercise is the memento mori, or remembering mortality. Often, the fear of death is one of the greatest sources of anxiety and anguish in human life. The Stoics believed that by daily reminding ourselves that death is a natural part of existence, the mind can free itself from irrational fear and begin to live fully. By accepting the finitude of life, we focus on what truly matters, living virtuously and with purpose. Control over judgments. One of Stoicism's deepest principles is the idea that it is not things in themselves that disturb us, but rather the judgments we make about them. This assertion, which comes from the philosopher Epictetus, has radical implications for our understanding of mental freedom. If we manage to control our judgments, our perceptions of the world, we can free ourselves from much unnecessary suffering. For example, losing a job may initially seem like a tragedy. However, for the Stoics, the fact of losing a job is just a neutral event. What truly causes us pain or anxiety is the judgment we make about that event. If we see it as a personal catastrophe, we will suffer. If we see it as an opportunity to learn and grow, or as something beyond our control, we will be able to maintain our serenity. This control over judgments does not mean that the Stoics were insensitive or indifferent to reality. Rather, it means they trained their minds not to be held hostage by their immediate emotions. Instead of reacting impulsively, they learned to observe their thoughts, evaluate them rationally, and then decide how to respond. Acceptance of nature and fate. Another key Stoic idea is the notion of amor fati, or love of fate. The Stoics not only believed in accepting circumstances but also promoted the idea of embracing fate as it is, with all its challenges and difficulties. This radical acceptance of life as it presents itself is one of the most powerful steps toward mental freedom. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius, in his work Meditations, wrote, "Love the life you have been given. If a better one had been given to you, you would have received it." With this attitude, the Stoics not only accept what they cannot change, but see it as an essential part of their personal and spiritual development. By fully accepting the flow of life, with its highs and lows, they free themselves from the desire for things to be different and, thus, from the mental slavery that this desire generates. Self-discipline and freedom. Self-discipline is one of the fundamental pillars in the path to mental freedom in Stoicism. For the Stoics, self-control is not a form of repression but an essential tool to avoid falling into the traps of the mind that enslave us. Instead of being led by every impulse or desire, we must be able to regulate our actions and thoughts according to reason. The relationship between self-discipline and freedom. We often think that freedom consists of doing whatever we want, following our impulses without restrictions. However, for the Stoics, this way of life inevitably leads to mental slavery. When we live without discipline, we become vulnerable to our emotions and desires, and we end up being slaves to those impulses. In other words, instead of being truly free, we are controlled by what we feel at any given moment. True freedom, according to the Stoics, is the ability to act according to reason, not passions. By practicing self-discipline, we train ourselves to remain calm in difficult situations, to resist fleeting pleasures that distract us from our goals, and to endure hardships with serenity. In this way, little by little, we free ourselves from the bonds of uncontrolled emotions and approach a deeper freedom. The value of temperance. One of Stoicism's cardinal virtues is temperance, which consists of moderating our desires and actions. Practicing temperance does not mean rejecting all pleasures or living austerely, but learning to enjoy things in a balanced way without letting them dominate us. When we can enjoy life's pleasures without becoming obsessed with them, we free ourselves from the dependency and slavery they generate. Temperance also involves knowing when to stop. In a world that constantly incites us to excess, whether it's consumption, entertainment, or emotions, the ability to moderate becomes a form of resistance. The Stoics understood that true satisfaction does not come from accumulating more, but from learning to appreciate what we already have without being carried away by the desire for more. Resilience in Stoicism. Resilience, or the ability to recover from adversity, is another fundamental concept for the Stoics in their rejection of mental slavery. For the Stoics, resilience is not simply about enduring suffering, but about learning from it and becoming stronger through adversity. This ability to face difficulties without being mentally broken is key to avoiding falling into the slavery of our emotions or circumstances. Instead of avoiding problems, the Stoics advocated facing them with a calm and controlled mind, seeing each challenge as an opportunity to exercise virtue and grow inwardly, turning adversity into strength. Life is unpredictable, and at some point, we all face challenges that seem insurmountable. For the Stoics, the key to maintaining mental freedom in such situations lies in how we choose to face them. Epictetus stated that we cannot control what happens around us, but we always have control over our attitude toward those events. If we see each adversity as an opportunity to practice patience, fortitude, and self-control, even the most difficult moments can become tools for growth. Resilience, then, becomes a form of freedom. When we do not allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by pain, fear, or uncertainty, we remain masters of ourselves. This is the opposite of mental slavery, where we allow external circumstances to dictate how we feel and act. The Stoics saw resilience as a way to stand firm against life's storms without losing control of their inner serenity. Active acceptance of reality. Another fundamental aspect of Stoic resilience is the active acceptance of reality as it is, without resisting the inevitable. This idea, which often seems radical in the modern world, is expressed in the practice of amor fati, love of fate, already mentioned. The Stoics not only advise accepting what happens but also loving it, embracing it as part of the natural order of things. By doing so, we free ourselves from the anguish that comes from wishing things were different from what they are. Imagine facing a job loss, an illness, or a betrayal. While many people sink into despair by resisting these events, the Stoics suggest that we should accept what we cannot change with serenity and, more than that, learn to see these events as opportunities to demonstrate our inner strength. This active acceptance is one of the keys to maintaining mental freedom, as it prevents us from getting trapped in resentment, frustration, or pain. The practice of self-control in crisis moments. Resilience is not limited to facing external adversities. It also involves controlling our internal reactions. When something deeply disturbs us, whether it's a criticism, a betrayal, or a loss, our first reaction is often emotional: anger, sadness, fear. The Stoics understood that these emotions cannot be completely eliminated, but we can learn to manage them. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, urges us to pause for a moment before reacting to any situation. He invites us to observe the emotion that arises, acknowledge it, but not let it control us. Instead of acting impulsively, the Stoics practiced reflective pause, allowing reason to take control before acting. This type of self-control is essential to avoid mental slavery, as it allows us to maintain clarity and calm even in the most difficult moments. The path to freedom. For the Stoics, freedom cannot be separated from virtue. According to them, only by living in accordance with virtue can we be truly free, because virtue is the only thing that depends entirely on us. Unlike wealth, fame, or even health, which are subject to external circumstances, virtue resides within us and cannot be taken away by anyone or anything. This focus on virtue as the path to freedom is central to Stoic philosophy. The four cardinal virtues. Stoicism identifies four cardinal virtues that are the foundation of its ethics: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Each of these virtues plays a crucial role in liberating the mind from the chains of uncontrolled emotions and irrational desires. Wisdom allows us to distinguish between what we can control and what we cannot. By understanding this distinction, we avoid investing emotional energy in things beyond our reach and focus on what we can truly improve: our attitude and actions. Justice, in the Stoic context, means living in harmony with others, treating everyone with fairness and respect. This virtue frees us from the slavery of envy, resentment, or revenge, because it teaches us to act impartially without being driven by our passions. Courage is the ability to face pain, fear, and adversity without losing serenity. The Stoics see courage as an inner strength that allows us to remain firm and resilient, even in the darkest moments, avoiding the irrational fear that enslaves so many people. Temperance is the virtue of moderating our desires and actions. Through temperance, we free ourselves from the insatiable pursuit of fleeting pleasures and prevent emotions from dominating us. Virtue as the only source of happiness. For the Stoics, true happiness does not reside in temporary pleasures or external success, but in living in accordance with virtue. When we act virtuously, our mind remains at peace, undisturbed by desires or emotions that lead us away from our purpose. This inner peace is the clearest manifestation of mental freedom. Seneca, in his writings, mentions that virtue is the only true good because it does not depend on anything external. We can lose our wealth, our health, or our relationships, but no one can take away our ability to act with wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. This focus on the self-sufficiency of virtue liberates the mind from the constant concern for the whims of fate. The rejection of material attachment. One of the most common forms of mental slavery is excessive attachment to material possessions. The Stoics, while not completely rejecting the material world, warned against the human tendency to equate happiness with the accumulation of wealth or goods. According to them, this constant pursuit of possessions makes us slaves to our own desires and, worse still, leaves us vulnerable to suffering when we inevitably lose what we have become attached to. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was a clear example of this rejection of material attachment. Having been a freed slave, Epictetus lived with the bare minimum and taught that wealth and material goods were not true sources of satisfaction, but distractions that led us away from virtue. By freeing ourselves from the desire for possessions, we free ourselves from the anxiety that comes with their loss. The conclusion the Stoics arrive at: true freedom is ultimately a state of mind. For the Stoics, true freedom is not found in external circumstances, but in how we interpret and respond to those circumstances. It is a mental state that anyone can achieve, regardless of their situation, because it does not depend on external factors like wealth, power, or social status. What truly enslaves us is not what happens outside of us, but our own reactions, perceptions, and judgments about those events. Epictetus and inner freedom. One of the great advocates of the idea of inner freedom was Epictetus, who, ironically, was born into slavery. Despite his condition, Epictetus taught that true slavery was not physical but mental. A person could be physically free, but if they were trapped by their desires, fears, or passions, they were still a slave. Conversely, a person could be imprisoned or in the worst physical conditions, but if their mind was strong and free from internal chains, that person would be truly free. Epictetus maintained that everything we truly need to be free we already possess: our ability to choose how to respond to what happens to us. We cannot control what others do or what fate brings us, but we can always control our attitude. In this sense, Stoic mental freedom consists of choosing to respond rationally and virtuously, without being dominated by emotions. The dichotomy of control. The key concept for understanding this mental freedom is the dichotomy of control. The Stoics divide life into two categories: things we can control and things we cannot. The only things we can truly control are our own thoughts, actions, and reactions. Everything else, from other people's opinions to our physical health and material conditions, is beyond our control. This dichotomy helps us focus on what truly matters. Instead of wasting mental energy worrying about things we cannot change, the Stoics urge us to direct our attention to our own attitudes and behaviors. This simple distinction is key to achieving mental freedom because it allows us to liberate ourselves from the stress and anxiety that often arise when we try to control the uncontrollable. Freedom in the face of suffering. Suffering is inevitable in life. We all face losses, illnesses, betrayals, and other pains that are beyond our control. But, according to the Stoics, while we cannot avoid pain, we can avoid the unnecessary suffering that comes from resisting the inevitable. This resistance, this struggle against what is what mentally enslaves us. Marcus Aurelius, one of Rome's greatest emperors and a devoted Stoic, wrote in his Meditations about the importance of accepting what happens without complaining. While we cannot change many of the difficulties life presents, we can change how we face them. Marcus Aurelius faced plagues, wars, and the deaths of loved ones, but he maintained his mental freedom by accepting that all of this was part of the natural flow of life. The Stoics argue that by changing our attitude towards suffering, we can transform it into an opportunity for growth. Instead of seeing pain as something to be avoided at all costs, we can see it as a test of our mental strength. This acceptance of pain and the rejection of unnecessary resistance is one of the key aspects of mental freedom in Stoicism. One of the most important aspects of achieving mental freedom in Stoicism is emotional detachment. This does not mean that the Stoics promoted indifference or emotional coldness, but rather advocated for a conscious control of our emotions. For them, the problem was not having emotions, but allowing those emotions to dominate us and lead us to act irrationally. Emotions under control. For the Stoics, emotions are natural reactions to what happens in the world, but it is our interpretation of those events that determines whether emotions become chains that enslave us. Fear, anger, sadness, and desire may inevitably arise, but if we allow these emotions to control our actions or cloud our judgment, we become slaves to them. For example, a person may feel anger when treated unjustly. This emotion, in itself, is not necessarily negative. What matters is how we respond to it. If we allow anger to consume us and push us to act impulsively or destructively, then we have become slaves to that emotion. Instead, the Stoics invite us to recognize the emotion, reflect on it, and respond in a way that aligns with reason and virtue. Stoic love and detachment. One of the criticisms often directed at Stoicism is that it promotes a detachment that can seem cold or distant, especially concerning human relationships. However, Stoicism does not advocate rejecting love or affection, but rather the practice of a conscious and balanced love, free from excessive attachment. The Stoics knew that love and friendship are essential parts of human life, but they also understood that excessive attachment to people could become a source of suffering. When we cling to people with the expectation that they will never leave us or that they will always act according to our desires, we prepare ourselves for disappointment and pain. By practicing detachment, we are not rejecting love, but accepting that relationships, like everything in life, are temporary and beyond our control. Marcus Aurelius wrote profoundly about Stoic love. He advised loving people as they are, without trying to change them, and accepting that at any moment, we might lose them. This kind of love is not less deep but more free and less selfish because it is not based on possession or fear of loss. Loving in this way frees us from the chains of attachment and allows us to enjoy our relationships without becoming enslaved by them. Detachment from outcomes. Another crucial aspect of detachment in Stoicism is the detachment from the outcomes of our actions. The Stoics urge us to focus on doing what is right, acting in accordance with virtue, without worrying excessively about the final result. This does not mean that we should not strive to achieve our goals, but we must understand that once we have done everything within our power, the outcome is no longer under our control. For example, if we work diligently to achieve a promotion at work, the effort we put into improving our skills and performing well is within our control. However, the final decision to grant the promotion does not depend on us. If we become emotionally attached to that outcome, we risk suffering if we do not get what we desire. Stoic detachment helps us maintain serenity regardless of whether or not we achieve our goals, because we know we have acted in accordance with virtue. Living in harmony with nature. Stoic philosophy is deeply rooted in the idea of living in harmony with nature. For the Stoics, living in harmony with nature was not just about following natural cycles or respecting the environment. It was a profound understanding that the universe follows a rational order. This idea is linked to their vision of mental freedom, as they believe that when we accept the natural flow of life as it is, we free ourselves from internal resistance and the suffering that arises from struggling against the inevitable. Nature as a guide. The Stoic premise of living according to nature has a dual meaning. First, it refers to our nature as rational beings. The Stoics believe that reason is our highest characteristic and that when we act based on it, we align ourselves with what it means to be truly human. The other part of this principle refers to the order of the universe itself. The Stoics saw the cosmos as an interconnected whole, governed by divine reason or logos. When we understand and accept this natural order, we can free our minds from the confusion and chaos that result from wanting things to be different. Accepting that the universe has its own course is fundamental to mental freedom, as it helps us abandon the expectation that the world must conform to our desires. Instead of trying to force things to happen according to our will, we learn to flow with events, understanding that what happens is part of a greater plan that we may not fully comprehend but is consistent within the natural context. The cyclical vision of life. The Stoics also had a cyclical view of life and the universe. They believed that everything that exists is subject to constant change, from the seasons of the year to the cycles of life and death. This understanding of the cyclical nature of things reinforces their teaching of detachment. When we understand that loss and change are inevitable, we can stop fighting against them and accept them as part of the natural order. For example, the Stoics taught that death, both ours and that of our loved ones, should not be feared or rejected. It is simply part of the natural cycle of life, a transition that occurs in its due time. By accepting this, the Stoics eliminate the fear of death, which for many people is one of the greatest sources of mental slavery. Being part of the whole. Another key to understanding the connection between nature and mental freedom is the recognition that we are a small part of a larger whole. The Stoics remind us that we are not isolated individuals but members of an interconnected cosmic community. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, often reflected on the fact that every human being is a piece of the universal puzzle, fulfilling a role within a larger scheme. This sense of belonging to the whole helps free the mind from the anguish that comes from extreme individualism and selfishness. When we understand that our actions and decisions have an impact on the collective and that everything that happens has a reason within the natural order, we can find peace. True mental freedom, according to the Stoics, arises when we accept our place in the universe and act in harmony with the common good, rather than seeking only our own interests. The serenity of accepting the immutable. Living in harmony with nature also means accepting what we cannot change. As we mentioned in the dichotomy of control, the Stoics believe that many things that happen are beyond our control, like the weather, illnesses, or even death. But if we learn to accept what cannot be changed and work within what we can influence, we achieve a serenity that frees us from frustration and stress. This principle can be applied to daily life. If, for example, we face a financial setback or a health issue, we can lament the situation and resist it, which creates additional suffering. Or, as the Stoics suggest, we can accept reality as it is and find ways to adapt and make the best of what we have. By doing this, we keep our minds free from the chains of regret, worry, and anxiety. Uncontrolled desire, a source of mental slavery. One of the greatest sources of mental slavery for the Stoics is uncontrolled desire. Desires that are not regulated by reason lead to dissatisfaction, anxiety, and suffering. Stoicism teaches that in order to be truly free, we must learn to control our desires and focus only on what is necessary for a virtuous and fulfilling life. The nature of human desires. The Stoics recognize that desires are part of human nature. We all desire food, shelter, companionship, and well-being, which are perfectly natural. However, the problem arises when these desires become irrational or excessive. Instead of seeking what is necessary to live well, many people seek to accumulate more than they need, whether it be wealth, power, or pleasures, falling into an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. Epictetus teaches us that the key to avoiding mental slavery is to moderate our desires and ensure that they are aligned with reason. Desires that drag us toward greed, avarice, or excess are ultimately self-destructive because they never provide lasting satisfaction. There will always be more to desire, and this constant pursuit of more keeps us trapped in a never-ending quest. Pleasure as a trap. Pleasure, in itself, is not bad in Stoicism, but the uncontrolled pursuit of pleasure is. The Stoics were not ascetics who rejected all forms of enjoyment, but they warned that pleasure, when sought as an end in itself, can become a trap. Pleasures are fleeting and temporary, and basing our happiness on them is like building our lives on unstable ground. Seneca, for example, spoke extensively about how fleeting pleasures can dominate the mind if not controlled. He reminds us that a life focused solely on the pursuit of pleasure is a life of slavery. We become dependent on those moments of pleasure, and when we don't obtain them, we suffer. Controlling desires, especially the desire for fleeting pleasures, is essential to maintaining mental freedom. Stoic minimalism. One way the Stoics proposed dealing with desires was through minimalism. This does not mean living in poverty or rejecting life's comforts, but rather learning to be satisfied with what is sufficient. Marcus Aurelius reminds us in his Meditations that many of the things we consider essential are, in fact, not. Luxury, fame, and status are distractions that take us away from true happiness. By practicing a form of mental minimalism, the Stoics teach us to eliminate unnecessary noise and focus on what truly matters. This includes both material and emotional desires. By reducing our desires to the essentials, we free ourselves from the constant burden of wanting more and from the anxiety that comes with the possibility of losing what we have. True wealth, in Stoicism, does not lie in what we possess, but in what we can live without needing. Stoic Practices for mental freedom. The Stoics not only proposed a set of abstract philosophical principles but also advocated for daily practices that helped maintain mental freedom. One of the most powerful tools they promoted was daily reflection, an exercise in self-awareness and self-evaluation that allowed individuals to review their thoughts and actions, to ensure they were aligned with virtue and reason. Stoic meditation. Marcus Aurelius is probably the most famous example of the practice of daily meditation. In his Meditations, he reflects on the challenges of being an emperor, the temptations of power, and the personal difficulties he faces. These writings were not intended for the public but were private reflections in which he explored his thoughts and emotions and evaluated whether he was acting according to Stoic principles. He asked himself whether he had given in to anger, sought fleeting pleasures, or allowed his mind to be dragged down by irrational desires. This kind of regular self-evaluation is a key practice for maintaining mental freedom. By reflecting on our actions and thoughts, we can identify moments when we have strayed from the path of virtue and correct our course. It allows us to be aware of our emotional reactions and ensure that we are responding to life rationally, rather than being carried away by momentary impulses. The importance of self-knowledge. Stoicism places great emphasis on self-knowledge. Knowing who we are, what our weaknesses and strengths are, and what truly motivates us is essential for staying mentally free. The Stoics invite us to look at ourselves honestly, without fear of acknowledging our flaws, but also without falling into self-loathing. Only through a deep understanding of our nature can we make conscious decisions and act according to reason. Seneca, in his letters, advises us to review our actions at the end of each day. This exercise is not meant to judge ourselves harshly but to learn and improve. By reflecting on our interactions with others, our emotional reactions, and our decisions, we can identify behavioral patterns that pull us away from mental freedom and virtue. Have we been led by anger? Have we desired things we don't really need? Have we acted selfishly or negligently? These questions help us maintain mental clarity and continue progressing on the Stoic path. Negative visualization. Another Stoic practice related to daily reflection is negative visualization. This exercise involves imagining adverse or even catastrophic scenarios, such as losing a loved one, facing illness, or failing at an important project. While this practice may seem grim or pessimistic, it has a deep purpose. It helps us mentally prepare for life's inevitable challenges and develop a serene acceptance of what may come. By practicing negative visualization, the Stoics train us to face the future with equanimity. While we hope for the best, we also accept the possibility of the worst. This frees us from the slavery of fear because, by having previously reflected on what could go wrong, we are no longer surprised or paralyzed by pain or failure. Instead of fearing the inevitable, we face it with a calm and prepared mind. Conscious gratitude. In contrast to negative visualization, the Stoics also encourage us to practice conscious gratitude. While it is important to prepare for difficulties, it is also essential to recognize and value what we already have. The Stoics teach that an essential part of mental freedom is learning to be content with what we have in the present moment. By doing this, we free ourselves from the constant pursuit of better circumstances or greater achievements and cultivate a deep sense of contentment. Epictetus often said that it is not external circumstances that make us happy or miserable, but our perception of them. When we learn to appreciate what we have and see the positive aspects of any situation, we develop a mindset of abundance that protects us from chronic dissatisfaction. This Stoic gratitude is not blind optimism, but a conscious practice of recognizing the good, even in the midst of adversity. Fear of death, a major obstacle to mental freedom. One of the greatest obstacles to mental freedom, according to the Stoics, is the fear of death. This fear, deeply rooted in human nature, can become a paralyzing force that prevents us from living fully. However, the Stoics developed a philosophy that seeks to confront this fear and transform it into a serene acceptance of life's inevitable conclusion, death as part of the natural cycle. The Stoics teach that death is not something to be feared, but a natural fact that is part of the life cycle. Everything that is born, sooner or later, must die. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, reflects on the transience of all things. From the greatest empires to the simplest lives, everything passes and dissolves over time. Accepting this fact, far from being depressing, liberates us. When we understand that death is inevitable and that we cannot control it, we stop living in constant fear of its arrival. This understanding allows us to make the most of the time we have, focusing on what really matters, living in accordance with virtue and being at peace with ourselves. Fear of the unknown. The fear of death often stems from the fear of the unknown. What happens after death? Is there an afterlife, or do we simply cease to exist? The Stoics adopted a pragmatic stance toward these questions. Instead of speculating about what comes next, they focused on what we can control, how we live our current lives. Epictetus argued that if death is simply the end of consciousness, there is no reason to fear it, as there will be no pain or suffering. On the other hand, if there is some form of continuity after death, then we will face that new reality when it comes, just as we face life's challenges. Either way, worrying about what we do not know is a waste of mental energy. Preparation for death. For the Stoics, being prepared for death does not mean living in constant fear, but cultivating an attitude of acceptance. This does not imply indifference to life or a renunciation of its pleasures and relationships, but rather an appreciation of each moment, knowing that it is temporary. Marcus Aurelius, in his Reflections, advised living each day as if it were the last, not with desperation but with a full awareness of life's fragility and beauty. Seneca, for his part, recommended that we familiarize ourselves with the idea of death from an early age. By doing so, when death finally arrives, it will not catch us by surprise or fill us with fear. Instead, we will be able to receive it with serenity as part of the natural course of life. The legacy we leave behind. Another way the Stoics approach the topic of death is through the idea of legacy. While we cannot avoid death, we can choose how we live our lives and what we leave behind. Marcus Aurelius reflected on the importance of living in such a way that when we die, our positive impact endures in the hearts and minds of those who knew us. This focus on legacy is not about seeking fame or recognition, but about ensuring that our actions, thoughts, and words contribute to the common good. By concentrating on living virtuously, we can be at peace with the idea of death, knowing that we have made the best of the time we were given. Applying Stoicism in the modern world. So far, we have explored how the Stoics developed a set of principles to achieve mental freedom in an ancient world full of challenges. But how do we apply these teachings in the modern world, where distractions, desires, and social pressures are omnipresent? Stoicism remains a deeply relevant philosophy, and its practice can offer practical solutions for facing contemporary challenges. The dichotomy of control in the digital age. In today's world, filled with social media, constant news, and the pressure to always be connected, the Stoic concept of the dichotomy of control is more important than ever. In the digital era, we are constantly bombarded with information, opinions, and external expectations. Social media, news outlets, and the culture of instant gratification can make us feel overwhelmed, comparing ourselves to others and desiring what we don't have. In this context, the Stoic principle of the dichotomy of control proves invaluable. Remember that the Stoics teach that we only have control over our thoughts, actions, and attitudes, but not over what others think or do, nor over external events in the world. Instead of obsessing over likes or social approval, we can direct our attention to what we can control, how we react, how we use our time, and what decisions we make each day. A practical example of applying the dichotomy of control in the modern age is how we deal with social media. Instead of falling into the trap of comparison or constantly seeking validation, the Stoic approach invites us to use these tools with moderation and purpose, avoiding dependence on external approval. Digital minimalism. In a society that values accumulation, whether of material goods or information, digital minimalism, inspired by Stoicism, teaches us to focus only on the essentials. The Stoics encourage us to constantly question what we truly need to be happy and to detach ourselves from excess. Applied to modern life, this principle could lead us to ask, do we really need to be on all social platforms? Is it necessary to be connected 24/7? How much of what we consume digitally adds real value to our lives? By reducing unnecessary noise and distractions, we free up mental space for reflection, creativity, and personal well-being. Managing emotions during times of crisis. The modern world is full of uncertainties, economic crises, political changes, and global issues like climate change and pandemics. In such times, emotions can overwhelm us, and fear, anxiety, and stress can dominate if we don't know how to manage them. This is where Stoicism offers valuable tools to maintain calm and mental clarity. One of the most practical Stoic teachings is to learn to observe our emotions without letting them take control. Epictetus reminds us that it is not events themselves that affect us, but our interpretation of them. If we can observe our emotions objectively without reacting impulsively, we can make wiser and more rational decisions. In crisis situations, the Stoic practice of negative visualization can also be helpful. Imagining the worst-case scenario is not an exercise in pessimism, but a way of mentally preparing for what might happen so that, if it does occur, it doesn't take us by surprise. This approach helps us accept reality and stay focused on finding solutions rather than succumbing to panic or despair. Inner strength in the face of adversity. Another key Stoic teaching is the idea that, while we cannot control what happens around us, we can control how we respond to it. This idea is especially relevant in difficult times. Modern life is full of challenges, job losses, personal failures, family crises, but, like the ancient Stoics, we can cultivate inner strength to face these adversities with courage and resilience. Seneca wrote, "Fire tests gold." The difficulties we face in life are tests of our inner strength, and we can choose to see them as opportunities for growth. Instead of resisting adversity or lamenting what we cannot change, the Stoic approach teaches us to see every obstacle as an opportunity to improve our ability to be resilient. Virtue as the core of happiness. At the heart of Stoicism is virtue, understood as the excellence of character and ethical behavior. The Stoics believed that true happiness could only be achieved by living a virtuous life, and this remains equally relevant today. The practice of virtue is not something outdated but an urgent necessity in a world where superficial success often takes precedence over integrity. Wisdom in decision-making. In a world full of complicated decisions, whether financial, personal, or professional, Stoicism reminds us that wisdom should guide our choices. Wisdom is not merely theoretical knowledge but the ability to make correct decisions based on reason and justice. In daily life, Stoic wisdom can manifest in questions like, is this decision consistent with my principles? Am I choosing what is right or what is easy? Will this path benefit not only myself but also others? In a world where quick and selfish decisions often seem the norm, Stoicism urges us to pause and reflect before acting. Justice and the common good. The Stoics emphasize that our actions should align with the common good, not just our personal benefit. In an era where success is often measured by individual gain, Stoic justice reminds us that we are part of a larger community and our decisions and actions affect others. Applying this teaching in modern life means adopting an ethical attitude in our personal relationships, in the workplace, and in society. From making ethical business decisions to treating others with respect and fairness, Stoicism invites us to act always for the benefit of the whole, not just for ourselves. Courage to face life's challenges. Courage is another essential virtue in Stoicism, and in modern life, it is necessary to face daily challenges with dignity. Stoic courage is not just about facing physical dangers, but also about having the bravery to remain true to our principles, even when it is uncomfortable or unpopular. In a society that often rewards conformity, Stoic courage encourages us to stand firm in what we believe, despite external pressures. Whether it's having the courage to tell the truth, to act with integrity in difficult situations, or to defend those without a voice, courage is fundamental to living according to virtue. The legacy of Stoicism, rejection of mental slavery and the pursuit of inner freedom. As we come to the end of this exploration of Stoicism, it is clear that the Stoic rejection of mental slavery was not just a deep philosophical reflection but a practical guide for everyday life. The Stoics teach us that true freedom is not found in external circumstances but in how we interpret and respond to life's events. The lasting impact of Stoicism. Today, Stoicism continues to be a source of wisdom for those seeking to free themselves from external pressures, social expectations, and internal fears. Through the constant practice of reason, acceptance, controlling desires, and aligning with virtue, we can achieve lasting mental freedom. Mental discipline as the key to freedom. Mental discipline, a cornerstone of Stoicism, provides us with the tools to resist the slavery of uncontrolled emotions and irrational desires. At the end of the day, the path to mental freedom is a continuous process of self-knowledge, self-evaluation, and personal growth. The question the Stoics leave us with is, are we willing to make the daily effort to care for our minds and cultivate virtue in order to live truly free, even in a world full of challenges? Conclusion. Throughout this conversation, we have explored how the Stoics rejected mental slavery, advocating for a life guided by reason, virtue, and self-knowledge. They understood that true freedom is not found in external circumstances but in our ability to choose how to react to them. By embracing their principles, we can free ourselves from the chains of fear, uncontrolled desires, and social expectations that limit us. Stoicism teaches us that no matter how many times life tests us, we always have the power to choose a response based on calmness, reflection, and virtue. This is true mental freedom, a mind undisturbed by external storms, free to focus on what truly matters. As Epictetus said, it is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Far from being an archaic concept, Stoic philosophy remains a powerful guide for those seeking to live with greater freedom, purpose, and inner peace in the modern world.